Hello, my name's Scott Craig. I'm a VAT partner at Azets, and I'm joined today by Veronica Donnelly and Alan Glen, fellow partners within the VAT team at Azets. We're here today to talk about VAT and specifically speculation that's surrounding potential budget changes to the VAT system and procedures. As is often the case in the lead up to a government's budget, speculation's rife over what may change, what may not change. This year, quite surprisingly, VAT has featured a lot more frequently than perhaps in previous years. And there's been discussion over whether VAT rates may change, VAT may be imposed on different subject matter or different sectors. We're going to take time today to consider those, discuss them, and give you our thoughts on what the government perhaps could do to make the VAT system a bit more efficient and effective. Alan, can I start with you and ask you about the speculation that surrounds VAT registration thresholds?
The VAT registration threshold is probably one of those that's most talked about. I guess it divides opinion. Should we increase it? Should we reduce it? Should we leave it the same? I suppose first things is that it hasn't really kept up with inflation. So I think at this stage, we probably should be expecting it to be more than 100,000. It's currently at 90,000, so I think it's got a bit to go. I think what might really help business growth is if we increased it by a few £100,000. Some people are saying to £250,000. That would keep quite a few businesses out of the VAT net, give them a bit scope to grow into that space before they start having to charge an account for VAT.
But that's not what the government wants to do. The government wants to try and increase tax take, so presumably their push is to bring it down.
Exactly, and I think that's why a lot of people are talking about reducing it to say 30,000. In my mind, that always seems pointless. Why don't we just take it away altogether? I guess that might simplify it for everyone. I think having these thresholds creates a cliff edge. So people will always work round that cliff edge. Either they bite the bullet and register for VAT and stay compliant, or they accept cash payments and they become fraudulent traders. I think the tax gap or the VAT gap currently, as reported by the government, is something like £9 billion. A huge percentage of that must relate to those traders who have decided they won't register for VAT and accept cash payments. So I think I suppose it's whichever way you go. I don't think it's straightforward, and I think it's I guess it's systemic of the VAT law and guidance at the moment. It does feels to me like it needs an overhaul. It needs a real good look at, because whichever way we go, whether we go up or down, there's pros and cons of each. I think it really needs a study to really look closely at the pros and cons.
But pushing it up would take more out of the VAT net, which wouldn't be good for the government's kind of mindset at the moment. So reducing it would mean more would fall into it. And actually, that's what happens with overseas businesses. They have to register from day one. So there may be something for them to think about.
And I know a lot of the European countries have adopted that approach. If you're an entrepreneur, you're in business, you have to register for VAT. Yeah. And I suppose it's quite a blunt instrument that way, and I think it always will be. So I suppose you can, if you want to give a more favourable tax position to those starting out in business, you can do it, I guess, through the direct tax system, which is a bit more refined, and I guess it's probably based on the performance of the business rather than just a number, a turnover number.
Be interesting to see what happens. Moving on slightly, there's also been discussion over perhaps new rates being introduced, or HMRC or the government kind of looking at imposing different styles of VAT or different kind of rates of VAT in different areas. Historically, their hands were tied because of European rules and legislation. However, we're now post-Brexit in a different era, and HMRC showed that if they really wanted to change VAT rates, they would. The private schools is a good example of that. Veronica, do you have any thoughts? Do you have any kind of views on kind of that particular area and what could be done within VAT rates and increasing or decreasing rates?
Yep, absolutely. And I think what you say is absolutely right. Pre-Brexit, we were slightly more tied to what we could do. If you lost the zero rate, you couldn't go back. So there were changes. We've got VAT on fuel and power now that we didn't have before. Post-Brexit, we're not tied to the same degree. So certainly that could be looked at to say, where could we change and apply VAT where it wasn't applied before? Private schools is the obvious one, where it's already been implemented, and we've now got VAT on education. There were conversations about possibly introducing VAT onto private medical treatments. But that now seems to have been stated that wouldn't happen. So, but it's the fact that it's been looked at and it's been suggested. This is new, we're not used to this. Certainly the reduced rate can be amended at any time. 5% is just a rate of VAT. It's not tied to 5%. In history, we've had 8%, 12.5%, 25%. It can be any amount the government wants to impose. So that's an area HMRC could look at. The difficulty is that the zero rates and the exemptions have been applied to areas where there's been an economic need. And the original thought process was to not increase cost on the general public for certain services. So it's an interesting area for government to be looking at, but certainly they could change the rates.
And it's certainly with the schools. I mean, there's public outcry over it pushing the cost of school education up. There's also the worry over students going into mainstream education. That seems to have been squashed, certainly in the recent communication, so it will be interesting to see what they say. The government could obviously introduce VAT if it decided that would be a good idea to try and raise revenue, and that seems to be what it's in its kind of itinerary just now. In Germany, there is the ability to opt to charge VAT on certain services, as in financial services. We already have that in the UK with opting to tax on property. What are your thoughts on the idea of kind of electing, having more areas of election where you can charge VAT if it's deemed to be appropriate?
Yeah, I think choice is obviously a good thing. It seems to be working in Germany and France, the option to tax on financial services. Financial services is a huge industry in the UK. It could make a real difference. I guess the benefit of it immediately would be to the providers, so the banks, the insurance companies who can't recover VAT at the moment. That would allow them to recover VAT. But for your consumer, it's potentially adding tax to that charge.
But presumably, if they can recover VAT, then their margin would kind of hopefully be greater, and you would hope that they maybe wouldn't pass on the charge in full. So the cost of financial products might not be affected as much as you would initially think.
Absolutely.
I think there's a danger with opting to tax financial services that the property fell into, in that the legislation got very complicated. A simple idea of there's VAT on some transactions, not on others, has morphed into a whole lot of legislation around financiers and developers and what the use of the property is. And that very easily lends itself to quite a complicated financial VAT accounting system if that comes in. So whilst there potentially is a benefit to Treasury to doing it, there also comes a lot of administration and potential difficulty in implementing any piece of law.
You might argue that the VAT legislation for financial services is complicated enough.
Absolutely.
With all the acronyms that are used within the sector.
And the general feeling is that we want the tax rules, especially the VAT rules, to be more kind of clear-cut and simplified rather than even more complicated than perhaps they are and they could be. With that in mind, are there any other areas or any other sectors you think the government could look at or they might kind of consider?
I think so. The third sector, the not-for-profit sector, has basically for the last few years been starting to undertake a lot of work that would have historically been undertaken by the public sector. And in previous budgets, the government has announced a special VAT status for some of those types of activities, like air ambulance and blood bikes and hospices. In my view, they could extend that a bit further. I think the care and welfare sector in particular seems to be undertaking a lot of work that the government once might have done, and therefore it makes sense that these organisations who are typically either grant funded or funded by fees which are exempt from VAT cannot recover VAT that they incur on expenses. By giving them that special status that has been given to others, then they could recover that VAT and effectively operate more efficiently.
And it shouldn't. I think I would agree with you. I've seen some of the ideas of it, that shouldn't really affect public spending either, because if they can recover VAT, the public spending that currently goes against those areas could actually be reduced to kind of take account of the VAT they could recover.
It's interesting, yeah. Where there is a will, there's a way. We saw it. This first came around with academy schools in England, where the government wanted to put the provision of education out to academy schools, and ironically forgot about the VAT position at the start, but they very quickly were able to introduce the special VAT status for the academy school to put them on the same footing as a local authority school, I guess. So we see care providers doing what local authorities might have done, so give them the same status as local authority, I would say, yeah.
Agreed.
But what would be really helpful is if it's going to be announced in budget that there will be changes of that kind, that the thought's gone into what are the exceptions. So rather than just it's a one size fits all, is what are the difficulties they will face, what's the special status, because what inevitably happens is you have parts of the sector who have to suffer the pain until that special status is given, which is sometime after the VAT rate's been changed. So if that's been dealt with efficiently, it doesn't put a burden on any part of the sector.
So really your point, I mean, I think we're talking there about what the government could do that could be beneficial, and what the government could do that could be detrimental to businesses and to kind of, I guess, business in the UK. It always sort of strikes me that having a strong HMRC is good, not just for the economy, but is good for business, because they're clearer in their commitment and their understanding of VAT rules and VAT situation. I think we've all seen situations recently where the amount of time and effort taken by businesses to resolve, challenge, overcome HMRC's inquiries seems to be increasing, and it's not a very efficient process. Can either of you think of things that could be done to make the system or the situation a bit more beneficial?
I think that the legislation needs an overhaul. It was written before I was born, which might be surprising. But yeah, 1973. So, and it's not changed a lot from then. There's been lots of additions, and I suppose part of the difficulty is that it's a tax by exception. We can't easily point to a list of items that are liable to 20%. So it's kind of set up to fail in a way that as a business owner, you have to be able to look at all the exceptions before to work out whether it applies to you, rather than just saying, okay, I'm a carpenter, look down the list. Carpentry, that's 20%. It's not that, because you've got to work out, well, it's construction services, and well, what am I working on, and the list goes on. So you could be a carpenter, and some days you might be charging 20%, sometimes you might be charging 5%, sometimes you might be charging 0%, depending on the type of project you're working on. Well, it's great in certain spheres if you're charging a lower amount, but how difficult is that for your average?
So simplifying the rules, making the rules, I guess, easier to understand to the normal business person.
Absolutely.
But there's something to be said for the training HMRC officers, because we should be well settled in now to a merger between what was Customs and Excise and what was Inland Revenue. But we're now seeing a predominance of revenue officers who are direct tax officers who are dealing with VAT. And they call in specialist VAT officers who, to a large extent, parachute in, give an opinion, and then leave the case officer to continue with the case. VAT legislation is not the same as direct tax legislation. And without that specialist knowledge, it's very difficult for HMRC to advise businesses efficiently and simply so that they can actually get on with their daily business and actually running the business. So I think it would be helpful if HMRC officers were trained more specifically in VAT, or go back to, I suppose, what you could call the good old days when there were dedicated VAT officers who actually they were the only ones dealing with VAT, because there's a lot of time that's wasted while revenue officers try to get up to speed with what the VAT legislation actually says for a business.
There's been a big discussion over using AI and using kind of technology. Do you think that's a good thing?
I think we all know that's potentially a very dangerous thing, that even in our own business we can look at the use of AI and it's only as good as the interpreter to some extent. Yes, it will cut down a lot of time, but if there's not a skilled, trained person reviewing that, then where might we end up? I think we're already told by judges and tribunals that you can't rely on HMRC. Surely we should be working on improving the skill set within HMRC so that taxpayers can rely on what HMRC are telling them.
I also feel that the relationship that HMRC has with business and advisors has been strained probably over the last kind of few years. So it's actually building relationships, building kind of, I suppose, working interaction might help as well, might make things a lot more efficient, certainly from our side.
Absolutely, I'd agree. I think it's a great idea. It's just a shame that I think the Office of Tax Simplification seemed to be working towards that and improving things, and then it was shut down in 2022 with no explanation. Now, in the spring budget, the government, Rachel Reeves, announced that there was going to be extra funding for HMRC. I don't think any of us are seeing the fruits of that yet, but well, hopefully, things will change.
To summarise, I think we're saying that an investment in training officers, an investment in relationships with business, perhaps being a little bit more accommodating rather than as aggressive as they've been of late, might help to improve things. Failing to do those areas or those sorts of things and failing to look at simplifying the rules, the legislation won't move us forward any. The reliance on AI isn't going to move us forward any. So it's there's many solutions probably, but whether the budget brings that out is another question.
We'll have to wait and see.
Veronica, Alan, thank you very much for your thoughts and comments. As I'm sure we can see, there's lots of speculation and lots of kind of ifs, buts and maybes at this moment in time. We should just have to wait and see what the budget produces and be alert and ready to go up until then. Until official announcements are made either around the budget or during the budget, which isn't until the end of November, it'd be prudent to make sure that your current VAT affairs are compliant and that you document or evidence any changes or any decisions that you make at this particular time. Remember, if you like to discuss the impact of the budget or your specific business activities, please get in touch with us. We'd be delighted to help.